Okay, we are live.
So exciting.
Wow, this is very exciting. It is 10:28. We're gonna wait a little bit of time to see who decides to show up. But we are here at the Soil Health Interpretive Center in Elora. Hey there, everybody. Thanks for everybody who's joining in. This is Jordan.
Hello.
Jordan is a co-op student with us this summer. My name's Cam. Hi, everybody. I'm the Knowledge Mobilization Coordinator with Soils at Guelph. We'll do these introductions again in just a little bit. We're going to wait for some more people to show up, but yeah, welcome to the Soil Health Interpretive Center. Gosh, my autofocus is going to be interesting with all that. Cool. Jordan, can I hand this off to you?
Absolutely.
Sweet. You said it was best to go from over there, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody, we're going to be playing with the wind a little bit, so we'll try to articulate, we'll try to be clear. It is a bit breezy up here, and there's not a whole lot of shade in sight, so thankfully they escaped a little bit of the storm. We're just going to give a couple more minutes, allow a few people to tune in.
Nice little panorama here. Look at some of the soybeans. Awesome.
Right on. Hope everybody's having a good Tuesday. Right around break time. Coffee time. Hope everybody has a nice warm tea with them or something. Hope you're all enjoying air conditioning. How many faces do we have on there?
We have 11 right now.
11! Sweet! This is a good crew. This is a good sized virtual tour. We'll give maybe another minute or two. Is that okay?
Sounds
Thanks
good.
everybody for tuning in.
Oh, we're up to 12.
There we go.
Right. Wow, so many. 17.
17! Wow! It's always interesting to see who shows up at 10:29 and who shows up at 10:32. We appreciate you all just the same, though. Good. 10:32. I think that's probably a good group to start with.
I agree.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us here. We are at the Soil Health Interpretive Center in Elora, Ontario. This is on the Elora Crops Research Station, which the University of Guelph manages. It's owned by the province, but the University of Guelph manages it, and there's a lot of research that happens here, world-class research. My name is Cameron Ogilvie. I'm the Knowledge Mobilization Coordinator for an initiative called Soils at Guelph. So Soils at Guelph is an initiative of the university to promote knowledge sharing about soil science and sustainable soil management among researchers and farmers and farm advisors and folks from the general public who have an interest in the environment and in agriculture. So that is what Soils at Guelph is about. We're trying to facilitate a dialogue, get people talking with each other more about soil and why soil matters. So thanks for tuning in and being willing to listen to us a little bit about soil. Maybe you haven't thought a whole lot about soil, but we'll talk a little bit about it today. I'm joined by Jordan. Jordan is behind the camera right now.
Hello.
Jordan has been a co-op student with us this summer, and so she's been helping me with some of the projects that we're working on, trying to take soil science and get that into the hands of people who are trying to use that, primarily farmers when they're trying to implement better soil management practices. So maybe probably the first question to start off is like, why does soil matter? I don't know if soil has mattered to you all that much in the past, but soil is a big deal. It's one of our most important natural resources. Probably next to water, I would say it's soil. One of the reasons for that is that 95% of our food comes from soil. And so we need to manage this natural resource well. We need to manage it sustainably. If we're going to have food supply that's going into the future, we got to produce food for a growing population, and we want to do it well. We want to do it in a way that's good for the environment. So I guess that's the second side of why soil matters, is that not only does soil provide us food, but it also provides us other environmental services, we would call them. So sometimes we talk about them as environmental goods and services. So the goods could be food. We talk about 4 F's: food, feed, fuel, and fiber. We grow these things in agriculture. But the other side of this is the services that are provided by soil. And so I don't know if you've thought about this a whole lot, but the way that we manage soil affects the environment. We're going to show you a bit of a demonstration here on what this looks like. Jordan, why don't we switch cameras? You can kind of do the demo, and I'll kind of explain what's happening here.
Hello. I'm Jordan.
Hey, Jordan. Okay, so what we've got going on here are we've got 2 different soils. This one has been in a corn soybean crop rotation for 40 years. So what that means is for the past 40 years, it's been corn that's growing one year, soybeans growing the next year. Corn the year after, soybeans the year after that, and so on for 40 years. This soil has also had some tillage. So what that means is, you might be familiar in your back garden, you might be familiar with like a rototiller. So it's something that mixes the soil. And so tillage is exactly that. It mixes the soil, and what it does is it creates a nice fluffy soil that's easy to plant seeds into. So you've got some tillage going on here, and you've got a corn soybean rotation. Over to this one, this is a more complex crop rotation. It's corn one year, soybean the next year, and then wheat the year after that. And then what some farmers do is when they harvest their wheat, they plant what they call a cover crop. It's a crop that they grow not to harvest for grain or for feed, but they grow this crop to cover the soil, to protect the soil, to improve the soil. So this one again has a corn, soybean, wheat rotation with a cover crop in it. So a bit more complex than this one. And this one has not been tilled for 40 years. There's been no tillage. So whenever they planted the crop directly into the soil, undisturbed. Okay, so now this is a rainfall simulator demonstration. So what Jordan's going to do is she's going to go ahead and pour that water into the top, and we're just going to watch what happens. Watch what happens between these soils. Look at that. This is like a torrential downpour. It's crazy how much water this is. This is like your once a year rainfall that you get. Oh man, this is coming out perfectly. Look at what's happening here. Jordan, can you talk to us about what you're seeing?
So on our corn soy rotation that has been tilled, there's a lot of water ponding on top, and a lot of it that just sort of ran directly off into this front bucket here. It's a little bit cloudy as well.
Right.
And in our more complex rotation that had no till, there's no water pooling on top.
Huh?
And out front, there's the water that ran off is relatively clear compared to the other one. And they're both still draining into the bottom.
Right. And how about that drainage water?
Looks a little cloudy, I'd say.
That's cloudy.
This one's a little more clear. You kind of see it?
Yep.
It's about the same amount, I'd say. Or this one has a little bit more.
That's got a little bit more water in there?
Yeah, I think so.
I think you're right. It's not quite up the back there. And
yeah, this one's coming all the way back.
Right. Okay, folks, this is a prime example of environmental services provided by soil. Two soils from the exact same location, but managed in different ways, and look at what's happening, okay? So we have dirtier water that is coming off here. Part of what is going to be coming off in that water are nutrients that are bound to that soil. That water then ends up in our streams, in our rivers, and it goes down those rivers to our Great Lakes. And you may be familiar that Lake Erie has a lot of problems with something called eutrophication. What that is it's excess nutrients that are ending up in the water, and they're going downstream to the Great Lakes, and then it's all these concentrated nutrients in there, and it causes algal blooms, algae blooms. And then you can't swim, and it can cause other problems for aquatic life and things like that. Whereas here, look at that water. Like, obviously there's still going to be some nutrients that come off, but it's so much cleaner compared to the runoff that's come off from this tilled soil. You'll also notice that there is more water that has run off of this tilled soil than off of this no-till soil. And there's less water that has drained through the soil. There's more water that has drained through the soil here. So part of what's going on is that when you till the soil, when you mix it, you disturb the structure that exists there. And that structure is created by plant roots. It's also created by organisms like earthworms and insects. So there are earthworms and there are insects that are actively like burrowing, and they're making channels and they're making holes in this soil, and that's what is allowing the water to infiltrate. If you take some latex and you pour it into the soil and you let that fill those pores, that's what you get. So this is a latex mold that we poured into this type of soil under this management. And then these are the earthworm channels that you find. And you can even see, I think there's some root channels that go along here as well. It's amazing. So two different types of management. When you practice a more complex rotation, and the particular benefit in this rotation is the winter wheat. That's what's changing from this crop rotation. But then when you also don't till the soil, when you reduce the amount of tillage that takes place, you're able to preserve that soil structure that's there. And then that is what contributes to runoff in a big rainfall event. So this is a great example of environmental services that are provided by soil, but of course it's dependent on management, okay? And so that's the key when we come to this experimental station. So as we mentioned, this is the Soil Health Interpretive Center on the Elora Crops Research Station. So this is a world-class, state-of-the-art soil health monitoring station. We are collecting over 1 million data points every day from these experimental plots. And what we're doing is we're contrasting two different types of management once again. So what we have going on in these plots is a corn soybean rotation, just like you saw here. Corn 1 year, soybean the next year. And then what we have going on in these plots is a corn, soybean, wheat rotation with cover crops. So just like you saw there. Now, of course, we're not looking into tillage. Tillage was a bit of part of that demonstration, but we're not looking at tillage here. We're just looking at the impact of crop rotation on soil health. And of course, soil health is going to have an impact on environmental services that come from soil. You may be kind of wondering, like we've used this term soil health a few times. And maybe the question in your mind is like, can soil be healthy? So here, I'd bring an example to human health. How do you know that you are healthy? What are some of the ways that you can determine, oh yeah, my human health, my physical health, my mental health, my emotional health is good? You might look at some things like how's your mood, how are you feeling? You might look at indicators like weight. You might look at body mass index, but that doesn't work for every person. It doesn't translate across the board. You might look at heart rate, but different people are going to have different heart rates. So looking at human health is complex. And it's the same with soil. Like, how do we know if a soil is good and healthy? Well, there's some different ways that we could measure that. And part of that comes out in these environmental services that we're looking at. One that people are really interested in, of course, is greenhouse gases. So this is another environmental service that can be provided by soil, is that soil can store carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is a major greenhouse gas. It gets emitted to the atmosphere and then it causes global warming, contributes to global warming. But that carbon also gets taken up by plants. And those plants grow roots, and there's carbon in those roots. And when those roots die and decompose, that carbon gets added to the soil. We know that happens, but how do we measure it? Okay? So that's part of what the Soil Health Interpretive Center is meant to do. We have a bunch of different sensors that are sitting on top of the soil, and we have a bunch of other sensors that are inside of the soil, and these are measuring things like greenhouse gases. So this is an automatic gas sampling chamber. This chamber will close, and it'll seal, and then it's going to take a sample of the air that's inside, and we can measure the amount of carbon dioxide that's coming off of that soil. We could also measure another greenhouse gas called nitrous oxide. Maybe you're familiar with that as well. It's also a very potent greenhouse gas, and it's particularly related to the amount of nitrogen fertilizer that's added to the soil. So we can measure the differences in nitrous oxide emissions that come from the soil using these gas sampling chambers. Now, I haven't gotten to probably one of the key parts of this experiment, and what makes it so unique in the world are these instruments called Lysimeters. Okay? So you see how there's this ring in the ground? That ring is essentially a large soil core. So it's a stainless steel ring. It goes 1.5 meters down, and it's about 1 meter wide, and it's filled with soil. Now, the way that we got all these cores, there are 18 of them here, scattered across this experimental plot. The way that we got these is we went to 2 different environments with 2 soil types. One's a sandier soil, and one's more of a like a medium textured soil, less sand in it, a little bit more clay. And what we did was we took these soil cores and we used an excavator to press down on the top of them, so put a bunch of pressure on, and then we'd scrape the soil out around it. And then we press down some more and we scrape the soil out around it. Keep going like that until the whole core is filled. Now, of course, the benefit to this is that we get a whole soil section that's undisturbed. It's exactly the way that it existed when it was in the field. Then we get to bring it here, and so we get to essentially recreate what would happen in the field, but we get to add a bunch of sensors into the soil that we wouldn't get to add in otherwise. And we're going to show you what some of those sensors look like. But so as I mentioned, there's 18 of them here. They're under the different crop rotations. We're also looking at a winter warming treatment too. You don't see that out today, but we essentially have like one of those electric lamps that you'd see over a hot dog cooker. So we bring one of those out in the winter time to simulate what a warmer winter would look like with climate change. So we're going to transition and we're going to go down into one of the lysimeter wells, and I'm going to show you some of the instruments that we have down there, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the data that we're collecting. Okay?
Please let us know if you have any questions. We would love to answer them.
Thanks for mentioning that, Jordan.
Oh, no problem.
I forgot. I got to do masks. It gets a little bit tight down here. Okay. Thanks, Jordan. Down. Okay. So, it's a little bit tight down here, but what you are essentially seeing is this well is connected to 6 lysimeters that are around it. So you can kind of see where the wires run out of this well. So that's going to one lysimeter. You got some going to another lysimeter here. And then you got more wires going to the third lysimeter here. And then it's the same on this side. We've got 3 that are connected there. And so this is essentially the brains of the operation. This is what makes it so expensive, is all these sensors that are here. One of the main parts to this is, of course, collecting the data. So this is the brain. This is our data logger. So all of the different sensors are wired in here. They're connected to this data logger, and then every day this will store up all the information that's collected, and it'll send it back over the internet to the university. And then from the university, we upload this data onto a public database so that at some point in time in the future, if people are interested, other researchers are interested in going through that data and trying to answer some research questions for themselves, they'll be able to do that. So that's one side of the data collection here. Here are some scales. So this is one of the key parts to what makes a lysimeter what it is as an instrument, is we're measuring the weight of something. So usually you're measuring the weight to look at how water moves in that soil. So what we've got is, you see L1 and D1. This is the weight of the lysimeter, that soil core. And this is the weight of the drainage tank that's connected to it. So of course we're trying to recreate what would be going on in the field. So you've got this soil core that isn't actually connected to the soil around it. And when it rains, water is going to drain through that soil, and it has to go somewhere. Otherwise, it would just pool at the bottom. So there's a bunch of these hoses that connect the lysimeter to this drainage tank. Now, the reason why we want to measure weight, the weight of both, is that we want to know what's happening with the water. So when it rains, the weight of the lysimeter is going to go up, right? The water runs into the lysimeter, and the weight's going to increase. Some water is also going to drain, and it's going to go into the drainage tank, and that weight is going to go up. On the other hand, when you've got a really sunny day, of course, the weight of the lysimeter is going to decrease. Some of that water is going to evaporate from the soil, plants will also be using up some of that water, and they're going to what they call transpire some of that water through their leaves. So the weight of the lysimeter is going to decrease. So what we get to see from that is how water is moving in that soil. And what we know from a previous experiment is that in complex crop rotations, like the one that you saw with the corn, soy, wheat, and cover crops, they are more resilient to drought. It's a really key thing, 30% more resilient to drought. So in a drought year, what this means is that crops grown under this complex rotation yield 30% better. It's a big deal. Like, there aren't any other management practices that can make up for 30% of your yield in a dry year. So this is a big deal, but we don't exactly know why, because we didn't have instruments like this to measure it. All we could measure was crop yield. So now we have some instruments that we can be looking at. Okay, how much water is moving into that soil? How much water is being lost from that soil? And over time, we're hoping that we can kind of get a picture of how water is moving and what makes these complex rotations resilient to drought. That's going to become really important in the future with the changing climate, changing weather patterns. We want to understand what's going on there. Another part, as I mentioned, we measure greenhouse gases, and so these are trace gas analyzers. All of these gas analyzers are connected through these tubes to these gas lances. So these gas lances are installed into the side of that lysimeter, into the soil, and what they do is they provide a continuous circulation of air. And as they circulate air, of course, it's going to draw in some of the air from the soil. It's going to pull that back through these tubes, and it's going to come back to these gas analyzers. And we get to know how much carbon dioxide is building up at different depths in the soil, how much nitrous oxide is building up at different depths in the soil, things like this. So this is gas sampling. And then the other side of this is water quality. So just like the demonstration that we did up top, where you saw that the water runoff was different between the two cropping systems, we can measure the water that's coming out of these lysimeters, and we can test it for different nutrients. Nitrogen is one example. Of course, we fertilize with nitrogen, but nitrogen also will be lost from the soil through what we call leaching. So it runs out of the soil and it leaches out the bottom. So what these containers are, these are bottles that we can collect water from the soil at different depths. So we can collect it from the soil. We have these water samplers in the soil at 5 centimeters, 10 centimeters, 30, 60, and 90.
We have a question.
We have a question. Yeah, what's your question?
I think it's about what we're doing with our crop rotations.
Oh, yeah.
Do we add, Anna has this question. Very interesting. Do you add manure or fertilizer, like vitamins for soil health? I'm thinking about my little urban garden. I always thought turning every year was good for the soil and for the veggies. Ah,
great question, Anna. Okay, so we are not applying manure to these crop rotations. We are fertilizing according to the recommendations that would be provided for our province. Now, you bring up an interesting question about tilling your garden. Yeah, tillage is a common agricultural practice. It dates back to the beginning of agriculture. We see people tilling the soil. Benefits to them. Of course, there's some trade. It's a complex world. I wish life was simple. But so you till the soil, and what you do is you create a nice fluffy seed bed. When you plant the seeds into that, the seeds have good contact with the soil around them, and it allows them to get established fairly quickly. It also allows the soil to warm up quicker in the spring. So the plants that are growing in that soil will also get a bit of a head start. Helps them to grow faster. Of course, the trade-off is that in rainfall events, you see a lot of that water is it just runs off the soil. It can't actually get into the soil because you've disturbed all the good soil structure. There's some nutrient loss that's involved in that too. So the benefits to not tilling are, of course, it's a little bit better for the environment. You do preserve some of that soil structure. But of course, the opposite of tilling is true, is that when you don't till the soil, it can be a little bit more challenging to get that seed into the soil and get it well in contact with the soil around it so it emerges properly. It's also going to take a little bit longer for it to warm up. You're also going to run into some challenges with weeds. So that's another reason why we use tillage, is tillage controls weeds. So when you don't till the soil, you have to find other ways to manage weeds. And another way that farmers have gotten around that is they've used chemicals, they've used herbicides, pesticides. And so that allows them to control the weeds without needing to disturb the soil. So it's trade-offs. It's a complex question to answer. Some farmers, the way that they've been trying to deal with that is using something called strip tillage. So instead of tilling the whole soil, what they'll do is they'll just till the strip that they're going to plant into. And then all the soil that's in between those rows is left undisturbed. So that's maybe a little bit of an in-between, and it's something that you could certainly play around with in your garden. I'd be interested to hear what you find. Any other questions there, Jordan?
No, not yet.
Okay, great question, Anna. Thanks for asking. So yeah, jumping back to this question about water. So we, of course, take a sample of the water from the soil, and we can pull it into these bottles. And we take those bottles back to the lab, and we can measure the amount of nitrogen or the amount of phosphorus or other types of nutrients that are in that water. Really interesting experiment that we did just a year ago on this site is we measured the amount of nitrogen that was coming off of these two crop rotations. So you remember we had the corn soybean rotation, and then we had the more complex corn soybean wheat rotation with cover crops. So what we found was that over the winter time, the water that was coming from the complex rotation that had the cover crops growing had 70% less nitrogen coming out of that water compared to the crop rotation that didn't have any cover crops. 70%, 70. So almost 3/4 less nitrogen that's in the water. This is really important. And it shows the benefits of these cover crops. Some people actually, instead of calling them cover crops, they'll call them catch crops because they catch those nutrients that could be lost over the non-growing season, over the winter time. So water runs out of the soil and it's going to take nutrients along with it. But when you have a cover crop or a catch crop there, those roots will use up some of those nutrients. And instead of those nutrients being lost, they're held in the soil. So this just shows the benefits, again, the environmental services of soil management and using, I even prefer to call them service crops, because once again, you're growing these for the service that they provide. In this case, it's catching leachable nutrients. But this again just comes back to the point that soil management provides environmental services for all of us. And so this is what we're measuring at this station.
We have another question.
Great.
What was the, Helen asks, what was the cover crop that was grown with that experiment?
Yeah, great question, Helen. So this was it was a mixture of different species. Cereal, crimson clover, tillage radish, or daikon radish. So 4 species in that mix. Yeah. And so, of course, that was planted after winter wheat was harvested. So winter wheat gets harvested right about this time. So it's August 11th. Farmers are probably just towards the end of when they're harvesting wheat. And when that wheat comes off, of course, you've got from August through till November pretty well that you could grow something. And if you don't grow anything, well, the soil sits bare from August all the way till next May. So this is one of the reasons why we encourage people to plant a cover crop or a service crop during that time, because it protects the soil, prevents nutrients from being lost, and it's a great way to provide some really good environmental services. Yeah, great. It is 11:03. I think we're just past our 30-minute mark. We'd be happy to take some more questions if any are there. But other than that, I think we've probably reached the end of our tour. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Glad that you could join us today. Hope you found this interesting. Hope you're a little bit more interested in soil and soil health. And if you want to find out more about the Soils at Guelph initiative, you can go to our website. That's Soils at Guelph, soilsatguelph.com. Is it .com or .ca? That's a good question. You should probably try searching both of them.
Yeah, you could just Google it.
Or just Google it. You can Google Soils at Guelph. I'm pretty sure it's soilsatguelph.ca. And you can also find us on Twitter. If any of you are Twitter users, you can go at Soils at Guelph.
Also on TikTok.
Also on TikTok. Jordan's TikToking away. Yeah. So if you want to connect with us, that's a great way to do it. You could also, if you have any other outstanding questions, you could email me, soils at uoguelph.ca. If you email there, I'd be happy to respond to you.
Oh, we do have one more. The video broke up a little bit when we were answering Helen's question. Could you repeat one more time what the cover crop was?
Oh, Helen, I'm sorry. So the cover crop was a mixture of cereal rye, crimson clover, oat, and daikon radish. Okay? Cereal rye, crimson clover, oat, and daikon radish. And that was planted after winter wheat. So it's planted around August. Great. Okay, thanks everybody for watching.